I found out about my wife's affair with my best friend and decided to plan a surprise for them. My wife, Rachel, and I grew up in a fairly large town with a population of around 30,000 people. We had known each other since we were about 6 years old and were practically inseparable. At 16, we started dating, and when we turned 18, we moved to a city just a few hours away from our hometown for work. By the age of 20, we got married and bought our first home. At 22, she became pregnant with a boy, and that's when tragedy struck. About 5 weeks before she was supposed to go on maternity leave, a large shelving unit collapsed and crushed her. I was told that she and our baby died instantly. 2 of her colleagues were also injured in the incident. One was left paralyzed, and the other lost a leg, which had to be amputated. The company she worked for, in an attempt to save money, had continued using old, unsafe shelving instead of replacing it. To this day, I cannot forgive the executives and managers who made that decision, as they took away the love of my life and our unborn child. Shortly after the tragedy, I was informed that I had a choice regarding what the company called compensation, something I referred to as blood money. They wanted to settle the matter out of court to avoid a lawsuit, but I was determined to seek justice. Thankfully, with extensive media coverage and the involvement of several politicians, the case was quickly resolved in court within about 3 years. The compensation for all parties ended up being nearly 10 times higher than initially offered. Those scoundrels, the company, were fined for multiple violations of health and safety regulations. Several executives were fired, and some even ended up in prison. During this time, I continued working for a telecommunications company. My mother, bless her soul, moved in with me to help while everything was going on. I don't think I would have coped without her support. Around this time, I was offered a promotion, which required frequent travel around the state. I requested to be based at a branch office in my hometown because I not only wanted to conduct business statewide, but also work in my hometown, where the company didn't yet have a representative. They agreed. A few months later, everything settled down, and I rented a small house in my hometown so I wouldn't have to stay at my parents' place every time I came back. It allowed me to come and go as I pleased, which will be important later in this story. 4 years passed. I had just returned from one of my trips on a Friday and was handling some tasks at the office when Harry, the branch manager, walked into my office. Harry and I had grown up together, though we attended different schools. After my return, we became close friends. He asked how I was doing and invited me to a party at his place that evening. It was a sudden invitation, but I agreed. I felt like I needed a drink with friends. At the party, Harry introduced me to Catherine. She was a new employee at the branch office in my hometown and was just getting to know the team. It was a new city for her. We immediately hit it off, and, as cliché as it sounds, it felt like I wasn't talking to Catherine but to Rachel herself. I'll spare you the unnecessary details, but after 2 years of dating, we decided to take the next step, and she moved into my home in my hometown. Up until this point, everything was going well. Catherine got along with my parents, and Rachel's parents also approved of her, happy that someone had managed to make me as happy as Rachel once did. Everything was great for almost a year. Then things started to change. Video calls became shorter, and neighbors told me they often saw a car resembling Harry's parked in the alley near my house when I was away. Clothes that didn't belong to me started appearing in the closet. Everything pointed to the possibility of her cheating, but she assured me that everything was fine. She said Harry sometimes stopped by to discuss work and never stayed overnight. I brushed it off as paranoia and continued living as if nothing was wrong, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. About 6 months later, I discovered that she had been lying. I had just closed a fairly large deal with a new company, and the negotiations ended earlier than I expected. Instead of staying there for a few more days, I decided to pay for an earlier flight home to surprise everyone. A few hours later, I arrived in my hometown, pulling into the alley behind my house to enter quietly and surprise Catherine. However, a part of me still wanted to find out if the mysterious car would be there. And indeed, there it was, blocking the back entrance. At first, I was confused, thinking it was just an inconsiderate neighbor who had parked there. Then I realized it was, in fact, Harry's car. Parking behind his car, I got out and thought how odd it was for him to be there so late. She had always claimed he left early. As I approached the back of the house, I saw something that made my heart sink. I froze, and time seemed to stop. In my kitchen, my close friend was having an intimate moment with my girlfriend in my kitchen counter. I didn't know what to do. 1,000 questions spun in my mind. Was this real, or was I dreaming? Why were they doing this in my home? Feeling shattered, I turned and left without being noticed. I got into my car and sat there, what felt like forever. I cried hard, but the sadness quickly turned into anger. The same anger I had felt toward those responsible for Rachel's death. I wanted to hurt them badly. As a pacifist, I didn't believe in violence, so I realized I would punish them in a different way by ruining their lives. I backed down the alley far enough to still see Harry's car, then returned to the gate where I could see the house. I called her. They were still at it when her phone rang. Both of them glanced at the screen, and then at each other when they saw my name. I could see her hesitating whether to answer or not, but she didn't pick up. Moments later, they resumed. I called again. This time, she answered. As soon as she picked up, I hung up and headed back to my car. Shortly after, she called me back, asking why I was calling so late. I told her I'd be home in 10 minutes, and didn't want to startle her with my arrival. She was obviously shocked, but pretended to be happy that I was coming back. The conversation ended quickly after she said she'd go change. Moments later, Harry rushed out through the gate, still half-dressed, jumped into his car, and sped away as if he were being chased. I smiled slightly, knowing the fear they had both felt at nearly being caught. I waited a little before parking my car in the same spot Harry had occupied minutes earlier. The rest of the night passed quietly. Only after she fell asleep did I get up and head to my office at the end of the hallway. I couldn't sleep. I needed a plan, and I began to work on it. My mother had always taught me to be a pacifist and let karma run its course. But in this case, I decided karma could use a little help. I planned to punish them separately, but destroy both their lives. I knew Harry dabbled in substances, not anything too serious, but he kept it a secret. I had found out by accident when I saw some powder and plants at his house, but I pretended not to notice as he tried to hide them. I started calling clients who were involved in shady deals and made a few inquiries about buying substances. A few weeks later, I had amassed a large enough supply for my plan to work. About a month later, I hosted a barbecue for friends, including Harry. After making sure Harry had enough to drink, I offered to let him stay the night. Early the next morning, I took some of the powder and a few personal items of mine and placed them in various spots in his car, hiding the largest stash in the spare tire compartment. Confident he wouldn't find it for months while my plan unfolded, I locked his car and went to sleep. I also planted a little more powder and some of my personal items in his house when I drove him home, as he was too drunk to drive himself. A few days later, I staged a break-in by smashing the rear glass door in my kitchen and leaving the door open before heading to the airport. When I landed, I had several messages, one from my visibly shaken mother, who had discovered the broken door and called the police, one from Catherine, who was crying, and one from the local police asking me to call them back. I informed the police that I was on a business trip and would return the following week to speak with them. While I was away, I asked Catherine to stay at my parents' house until I got back and requested my father to arrange for cameras and an alarm system to be installed by a local security company. Returning home, I played the usual scene. Oh my God, I can't believe this happened. Who would even do something like this? After thoroughly inspecting all the rooms and discovering that my personal belongings were missing, I filed a police report. I also invited a representative from the security company to explain to Catherine and me how the cameras and alarm system worked. Then came the question I had been waiting for. What to do if we didn't want certain activities to be recorded? She looked a little embarrassed when she asked, but I knew exactly why she asked. The security rep reassured us that this question was common and showed us on the home computer how to disable recording for specific cameras to ensure privacy. As I escorted him out, I asked if it was possible to enable notifications whenever the cameras were disabled, just for safety. He returned helped me set up email notifications, and then left. Perfect. All I had to do now was wait. At this stage, I consulted a lawyer specializing in family law in my country. I needed to ensure my upcoming plan could be carried out legally and that I wouldn't be obligated to pay Catherine any money or share my assets. Since I wasn't sure if we qualified as de facto spouses, I wanted no unpleasant surprises in case she tried to claim part of my inheritance from Rachel. Big thanks to him, as he assured me that, despite dating for nearly 4 years, we hadn't lived together long enough to qualify as common-law spouses. And because I paid for all utilities and Catherine didn't contribute to rent, she had no legal grounds to demand money. However, just to be safe, he drafted what I felt was a rock-solid document in case any legal issues arose. The following week, my employer offered me a promotion that involved moving back to the city to lead the team I had previously worked with. This meant I wouldn't have to travel as often and could work in one place. The move would take about 6 weeks perfect timing to gather all the evidence I needed. The next week, back in my hometown, I began executing the remaining part of my plan. I asked Harry to approve a week of vacation for Catherine, in 2 weeks. I told him I wanted to send her and a couple of friends on a getaway before taking the most important step of my life for the second time. He jumped up and hugged me tightly, congratulating me on my readiness to take that step again. I hugged him back, but not in the way he probably imagined at that moment. He agreed and reserved the week, and I asked him to keep it a secret because I wanted to make it a big surprise. I knew rumors would spread quickly around the office, but that was part of my plan. That evening, I told Catherine I had booked a trip for her and 2 of her friends to a luxury spa resort for a week. All expenses paid, no questions asked. Pick 2 friends and return for the biggest surprise of your life. She squealed with joy like a child being told an entire candy store was now hers. Then I told her that I would be in town the following week, preparing for a meeting with a big client, but would be flying out and not returning until Monday, by which time she would already be gone. She seemed a little disappointed, but I assured her that everything would be worth the surprise waiting for her when she returned. What I didn't tell her was that I had decided to take a 2-week vacation on the other side of the country to mentally prepare for the storm that would break out as soon as she got on the plane and simultaneously enjoy the first stage of my newfound freedom. On Sunday, 2 weeks later, I returned home. Driving past the house, sure enough, Harry's car was there, just like on the first night I caught them. I parked a little farther away and checked the cameras. They were sleeping in my bed. No surprises there, considering I had recorded their intimate activities over the past 2 weeks of my absence. Then I made the first call to the police. I told them I was a neighbor and had noticed someone lingering in their car in the alley behind my house. From time to time, they were handing something through the windows of passing cars and occasionally looking into my yard. I expressed concern that they might either be selling substances or planning to break into someone's house. I gave them the car's license plate number and description. They said someone would be there in a few minutes. I thanked them and hung up. Then I called Catherine and told her I would be home in 10 minutes. I explained that, even though I knew she was leaving tomorrow, I desperately wanted to surprise her. Watching the footage now, I laugh at how much of a commotion this caused and marvel that I didn't hear it all from the street. Within seconds, Harry, half naked, bolted out the back door to his car. I couldn't have imagined a more perfect outcome. When Harry was running away, one of the police cars turned the corner near me, saw Harry speeding off, and began to pursue him. After I parked, I greeted an anxious Catherine, and we went through the usual couple routines. She fell asleep again, but of course I couldn't. The next day, a taxi picked up Catherine and her friends. After they left, I waited a few hours, and then began implementing the next stage of my plan. I called a friend who worked in moving services and asked him to help me pack and transport some things on Friday. Once we agreed on a time, I told him we'd need to take some boxes to a storage unit, and he agreed. I started packing Catherine's belongings. Later that day, the police called me and asked me to come in to identify some items they had confiscated from a suspect the night before, which matched the description of my stolen property. Smiling, satisfied that my plan regarding Harry was working, I replied that I'd come by soon to collect the items. Of course, when I arrived, some things were still missing, as they were likely at his house, which the police hadn't searched yet. By this point, the entire town was already buzzing about what had happened. In a small town, such events don't stay secret for long. Harry was disgraced and immediately fired for possession of substances and stolen property. Our company's higher-ups formally apologized to me on behalf of the company. That evening, I went to my parents' house and told them and Rachel's parents what had happened, omitting some details. I explained that I was moving back to the city after my promotion but without the unfaithful Catherine. They were upset that I hadn't told them everything earlier but were pleased that I was handling the situation with dignity and not stooping to her level. Although they approved of my plan to simply disappear from Catherine's life, they made it clear that they were proud I didn't lash out. After a few drinks, some laughter, and tears, I returned home. On Friday afternoon, after a hectic week of organizing cleaners for the following week, preparing the house for rental, and handling various tasks at the office in my hometown, I packed some belongings into my car and stopped by my parents' house to say goodbye before leaving. Before heading out, I visited Becky. Becky, one of Rachel's closest childhood friends, was the only person who knew what was happening, excluding the details about Harry. Without her help, I wouldn't have been able to organize everything so quickly. I handed Becky a large envelope containing evidence of Catherine's infidelity, a letter, and several legal documents from my lawyer. The documents outlined that Catherine was forbidden from contacting me and detailed how she could retrieve her belongings, which were stored in a rented unit. After a brief goodbye, I drove back to the city. On Sunday, I woke up to a flood of missed calls, voicemails, and text messages. It turned out that Catherine had returned home early after hearing about something happening in town, only to find the house empty with a for rent sign in front of it. Panicking, she drove to my parents' house, but they shut the door in her face. This prompted her to call everyone she could think of until she somehow reached Becky and learned about the package waiting for her. As I was told, she didn't take it very well, which was entirely expected. Judging by the numerous angry messages she sent me, she accused setting Harry up. I was concerned she might show up at my doorstep, but thankfully, that didn't happen. Now, to answer some of the most common questions people ask me about this story, what happened to Harry? Why was I so harsh on him? And why am I sharing this story online, potentially compromising myself? Harry is facing a few months in jail since this is his first offense, but he may get out even earlier. I believe this was necessary. I left out several key details that could precisely identify me and change descriptions of locations to make it seem like this story could happen anywhere in the world. There was already enough evidence in Harry's house. I simply provided the police with a reason to dig deeper into his activities. I don't regret what I did to him because he knew both me and Rachel since childhood, and was fully aware of how hard it was for me to get back on my feet after her death. What about Catherine? Catherine thought of herself as a socialite. Her words carried weight, and she valued her social status greatly. I knew that exposure would destroy her reputation. As it turns out, word of her infidelity spread across town, and her reputation was indeed ruined. I was later informed that she recently moved to another state because staying in this town had become unbearable for her. Was what I did legal, moving her belongings, sending her friends on a trip, and spending a significant amount of money on this plan? Morally, I understand that my actions were cruel. I built up her expectations for what she thought was going to happen, and combined that with the destruction of her status in the town. That was my ultimate goal, to make her feel what it's like when everything around you falls apart. Legally, however, I had every right to do what I did. For those claiming my story is fake, that I'm just seeking attention, or that I'm a sociopath, honestly, who doesn't have a touch of sociopathy these days? Think of me what you will, I couldn't care less. Thank you for your attention, and feel free to share your thoughts about this story in the comments. I can say that while the main character is a victim, he might have gone too far in taking revenge on his ex-wife. With that, I'll say goodbye to you. Have a great day.